gracious light, oh, purest brightness, oh, Jesus Christ, you are holy, you are holy. Now as we come to the setting of the sun, and our eyes behold the vesper light, we sing your praises, Father, Son, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Oh, gracious light, oh, purest brightness, oh, Jesus Christ, you are holy, you are holy, you are worthy at all times to be praised with happy voices, happy voices. Oh, Son of God, oh, giver of all light, let the earth glorify you, oh, gracious light.
Hello, everybody. Those of you who are watching, either live or recorded, if you watch me later, welcome to First Take Tuesday. Only First Take Tuesday is now Thursday. Well, it'll go back to being on Tuesday, and this is only the second one I've done, but this is part of the process of sermonating. That's not really a verb, but we're going to make it in this case. I just have not got a chance this week to look at the lections. There's just other stuff that has taken precedence over everything else. So now I find myself on Thursday just for the first time. Usually I read the lections on Tuesday for the first time, and so that I can start writing the process today. That did not happen this week because I had other fish to fry, as I like to say. I also don't have my glasses. That's going to be interesting. But so I'm behind. It happens. Just the nature of the beast, I guess, sometimes. So First Take Tuesday on a Thursday this week. But nonetheless, this principle still applies. This is the first take of lections, which means I've not read this stuff. I mean, I've read it before. I've just not read it in this context. So we're going to take a look at the Old Testament reading, which was our pick for our epistle. Well, not our epistle. Our epistle means letter. It's not a letter. Our first reading comes from the Old Testament. We always pick either Old Testament or a New Testament. We don't always do both. And then we pick a New Testament. We pick a gospel reading. So the first reading this week comes from our Old Testament. It is the book of Joshua. Let's see what we got. For those of you who are following along at home, we are doing Joshua 5, 9 through 12. I just had lunch with Elon. I should have taken this with him and asked him, but then it wouldn't be first take. It would be second take on this one, but first take on the other, I guess. Anyways, here we go. The Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away from you the disgrace of Egypt." And so that place is called Gilgal to this day. While the Israelites were camped in Gilgal, they kept the Passover in the evening on the 14th day of the month, in the plains of Jericho. On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened cakes, and parched grain. The manna ceased on that day. The manna ceased on the day they ate the produce of the land, and the Israelites no longer had manna. They ate the crops of the land of Canaan that year. So, I don't have a lot. There's nothing that I'm reading here that's jumping off the page. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It happens after the manna from heaven. There is a getting, the sort of Old Testament nature of being in love with numbers, really, right? So on the evening of the 14th day, they're really sort of locked into when it was. And then it was the day of the Passover. And then cakes and parched grains. Yeah, there's just not, in my first reading anyways, a whole lot here for us to work with in terms of where God is going and saying. I might grab my book and look at some more stuff. But it's in some ways I find that with elections sometimes we get things that are narrative, which are less, they don't move the ball forward in terms of this is something we need to have unpacked for us. This is a thing that we need some more further explaining. Bring the camera down just a little bit. Or sometimes we get stuff like a parable where it's really rich and there's a lot for us to sort of dig in and tear into. I certainly can get commentaries. Lord knows I don't know anything about Joshua right off the top of my head, which is why I'm mumbling, right? If I was Elon, I'd be able to knock that out. So I don't have anything that I'm just going to draw on instantly. This is more a story that is set in a historical context and place. So it's not going to have for me it might be interesting to look at if we were sitting having a conversation about it. Again, commentary, right? I don't want to read commentaries on Sunday. If I'm just going to give you historical narrative about what was going on in the place, for me, that's helpful, but there's nothing there that gets me excited about preaching about, because preaching has to be about what is God saying to us in this moment. If I'm just going to read a book to you that explains the historical narrative of this passage, then you're better off with the book, because that guy has studied that particular thing. So there's nothing that leaps off the page that begs me, even just sometimes it's just a turn of phrase, right? Something that we need to hear. There's nothing that really hits me or comes off the page. So let's look at the Luke and we may come back. Maybe there's nothing in Luke, and then we got to figure it out. That's always the fun part. The gospel reading this week comes from Luke 15, 1 through 3, and then 11 through 32. So we take a little gap in the middle, which always bothers me, but that's not your fault. All the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus and the Pharisees, and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. Then he squandered his property in dissolute living. It's a great phrase, dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. When he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. And he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. The father said to his slaves, Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And he replied, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. You have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. So, which one do you think I'm going to preach on? So the story of the prodigal son, right? Like, I'm not going to close this because I'm probably going to reference back to it. But, so the first take is, there's so much here, right? Like, there's so many ways to go with this. For years we preached on this, and I've heard it preached a million times, and we preach ourselves into various positions, right? We preach ourselves into the son who, like, we are unworthy, right? Like, we get very Lenten, and we start beating ourselves up and say, we've all done this. We've had dissolute living and devoured our father's houses with prostitutes. And so we preach it from the perspective of how good God is as the Father who takes us back in as the prodigal sons who come home. That's the first one. Sometimes we preach it as if we are the Father, and Jesus is reminding us to have the grace to eagerly welcome and accept people and welcome people home. It's another good take. I have tended in the last couple of years, and I think probably we'll go there again this time, found different ways, but like, what if who we really are is the older son, right? Is the other son. This sort of narrative of, it feels like the other son is older, the elder son, yeah. The elder son has this very real narrative. I think it's not a bad reaction. It just is what we are. Like, he has that same narrative, right? Like, of this isn't fair. This isn't just. Like, that kid, my brother, did all these terrible things, and yet here you welcome him home and do all this, and I've worked hard. Sort of ethic of, again, be gentle with it, but when we talk about welfare in this country, when we talk about tax breaks, when we talk about giving stuff to a homeless guy, whatever that is, like, the number of times I hear, but wait, like, I worked hard for this and they didn't do anything. And I get that. That's a really raw, and I want to celebrate it in a way, an honest answer, right? Like, we feel that way. Like, why are we working so hard if we aren't going to see any fruits of that? We should receive fruits of that. But the elder brother is worried about fruits that are his, just his. They're not fruits that are ours. The brokenness of not having your brother in the house, the brokenness of not having, of watching your father be heartbroken because this son isn't there. So what is justice? What is equity? What is right and wrong? What does some of these things mean? Why do we get ourselves so our narrowness of what fairness is only from that's kind of interesting. That our fairness is we only view fairness from our perspective, right? Maybe that's what it is. It doesn't matter which one of these people in the Prodigal Son. Hey, Diana, I saw you pop in. It doesn't matter which perspective of the Prodigal Son story you preach from to some extent. There's all this battle of fairness that the younger son, like, it's not fair that why is it fair that I'm, if I went home, I would, we wouldn't feed this stuff to the pigs. It's interesting. Sort of idea of fairness and equality. We might go towards that. It was actually the other thing that, in just sheer first take, right? Like, that's where this is about. I understand why they are putting this intro with this passage. I need to go and read and see what happens in the intermediate time, right? Like, what happens between verse 3 and verse 11 when Jesus gets to the parable. Why are we choosing in the lectionary to cut that bit out? So that's the other thing I want to look at. But it's also interesting, right? As is always the case, right? This other interesting take that may be worth looking at, this sort of the tax collectors and the sinners are all coming near to Jesus to listen. Like, they're drawn to it and they want to hear it. And it's the church who doesn't want to hear it. And how often is that the case, right? Like, so there's something interesting there, whether maybe it's a reminder that we need to stop trying to convert the world and convert ourselves. That if we lived and believed this stuff in the way that Jesus does, that in essence draws people in and they are changed by that, as the sinners and the tax collectors are. It's two very different ways to go there. I'm not sure which one is better or worse. And I have no idea where I end up on Sunday. It's always funny when I preach on parables. It's always interesting too, because part of the way I preach, parable means to throw alongside, right? Like a parable. So you parallel. So the in parallel. So to teach about this thing, I'll tell you this story that runs alongside of it, and maybe by seeing this, you'll see this. Parallel is funny for me because the way I preach, I tend to preach in that style that says, like, let me tell you about this and it will enlighten that. But when we preach about parable, it's funny because Jesus is trying to make this point, and so he tells you this story. And I'm trying to tell you about Jesus' story by telling you a story about a story that he told about this thing. So, there's that risk of getting, if I come up with an analogy or an allegory that's different, it's the risk of pushing it too far out. Whereas if I go towards the first piece it's not as risky to do that. Just in terms of raw technique stuff. So, it'll definitely be the Luke passage. There's more there for me to work with. There's more, even at this first read, that intrigues me and makes me wonder. There's things that certainly we as a church and a culture and a society want to wrestle with. What does, in an age where we get so highfalutin about the place of the church and the culture, which one of those sons are we being? In a time where the church is changing a ton, do we need to be reminded, you're here and you've already found and you've already heard the gospel, and we have to meet it and change and celebrate it in a way that brings the next guy in. It's an interesting way, that's the technology, you're watching this. That's the first take. I don't have anything else. I'm going to go take a kid to a dance lesson, but I had to read this stuff because I got to get started on the sermon. So drop your comments in the comment box. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on your first take, what you think I might say on Sunday, although most people wondering what I'm saying on Sunday. Want to hear from you, want to hear what you think. Your thoughts on these two passages, which one you're hoping maybe you hope I preach on the first one. Maybe you're tired of hearing about the prodigal son. Maybe you want to hear some weird stuff about Joshua. Drop your links and things. Don't forget to like and share, or like and follow and subscribe. Don't forget, you're always welcome to share it. It's a weird thing to share with people because it's sort of random. But make sure you share the rest of our stuff. All that being said, as I always like to say, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Most importantly, do good things. I will see you all tonight for Compline and Sunday for church.
Oh, gracious light, oh, purest brightness, oh, Jesus Christ, you are holy, you are holy. Now as we come to the setting of the sun, and our eyes behold the vesper light. We sing your praises, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.